Salvation Only for Jehovah's Witnesses with Paul Grundy. Watchtower teaches that only Jehovah's Witnesses will survive Armageddon. This is because they alone have Jehovah's backing, because they are the sole group that worship him. For instance, the Watchtower 1989, September 1st says, "Only Jehovah's Witnesses, those of the anointed remnant and the great crowd, as a united organisation under the protection of the Supreme Organiser, have any scriptural hope of surviving the impending end of this doomed system dominated by Satan the devil." The Watchtower 2001 says, "Hear what Jehovah says through the little flock of Jesus' anointed followers and their companions, his other sheep. Annihilation awaits all who will not listen and who thereby set themselves against rule by God's kingdom." Now, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, I always struggled with this concept. The only reason I was a witness is I had been brought up as a witness. I could not imagine that I would ever convert if I had a couple of people selling some magazines to me at a door. And so I asked my father, who was a circuit overseer, how could it possibly be that a loving God would kill billions of people at Armageddon? Now, he told me that, well, God is going to judge the hearts of people. You don't have to only be a Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah knows who has a good heart and he'll help them be saved. Now, I didn't really think that that was the official Watchtower teaching. I spoke to my brother-in-law, who was an elder, and I asked him about it. How could this possibly be just? And he said, well, you know, when the Great Tribulation starts, it's going to be so obvious that Jehovah's Witnesses are right that people are going to flock to the organisation and they can be saved. Well, I didn't think that sounded like the doctrine that I'd been taught through the Watchtower either. So I basically went off and then pored over Watchtower articles looking for different quotes to see what is the official doctrine about salvation at Armageddon. And hence the script for this article and video that we're doing here. This article is divided into three sections. It goes through the historical development of how this came about and how it tightened up as to who would be saved. It goes through quotes that shows what the official doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses is regarding salvation. And then thirdly, is this logical and is it a fair doctrine? The Watchtower presents a constant flow of ideas about who will be saved. Now, normally they're fairly subtle and sometimes it's quite direct. And so I'm going to go through a lot of quotes that show both the subtle and the direct nature of this teaching, that only Jehovah's Witnesses have any hope of surviving Armageddon. A 2014 Watchtower article said that our everlasting life depends on our obedience to the governing body or the faithful slave. In 2006 it stated that just as Noah and his God-fearing family were preserved in the ark, survival of individuals today depends on our faith and our loyal association with the earthly part of Jehovah's universal organisation. In 2001, it asked, is it presumptuous of Jehovah's Witnesses to point out that they alone have God's backing? Actually, no. In 1983, it was made very clear that Jehovah is using only one organisation today to accomplish his will. To receive everlasting life in the earthly paradise, we must identify that organisation and serve God as part of it. Now, the Watchtower goes as far as to say that there are billions of people that will die at Armageddon. In 1983, it wrote, "There are billions of people who do not know Jehovah who will be among those who perish during the Great Tribulation." The billions that die at Armageddon lose any hope of a resurrection. Theirs is considered an everlasting destruction. For instance, the Watchtower in 1990 said, "Yes, the destruction of the gross sinners in those cities was eternal, as will be the destruction of the wicked at the end of the present system of things." Likewise, it said in the Kingdom Ministry in 1968, "The majority of people living today will probably be alive when Armageddon breaks out, and there are no resurrection hopes for those that are destroyed then." That 1968 article was actually referring to the concept that the end was going to come in 1975, so a fail there. And so it shows that the majority of people alive in 68 were going to be alive in 1975, and that those that died would not get a resurrection. Rarely does the Watchtower make such audacious comments. Normally, it comes out with a lot more subtle concepts as to what is necessary to be saved. But these concepts are actually occurring with unwavering regularity, so that virtually every single meeting that a witness is at, there is some sort of concept thrown in that reminds them that they have to be an active, preaching Jehovah's Witness if they wish to survive Armageddon. And what's quite disturbing about this is that, as we'll see through the coming quotes, it doesn't matter if you worship Jehovah, it doesn't matter if you believe in Jesus and the ransom, it doesn't matter if you even go yearly to the memorial or even weekly to the meeting. It doesn't matter if a person is a Christian. Christians are considered part of Christendom. The only way to be saved at Armageddon is to be an active preaching member of the Jehovah's Witness Watchtower organization. Watchtower development. Imagine for a second that Watchtower is not the true religion. As a Jehovah's Witness, do you think that it is fair that God is going to destroy you because circumstances led you to the wrong religion? Would a loving God be prepared to murder 7 billion people? A God that is willing to kill that many people is not the God that Russell was following. In fact, when Russell described God after starting the Bible students, he described him as a God that would allow almost everybody to survive. Russell left the Presbyterians that he was raised as because he could not accept their teaching that only Presbyterian followers were going to be saved. We reasoned that if Christ's coming was to end probation and bring irrevocable ruin upon 99 of 100 of mankind, then it could scarcely be considered desirable, nor could we pray with a proper spirit, "Come, Lord Jesus, come quickly." Similarly, Russell could not accept the teaching that only Adventists would be saved, which was the religion that he followed after Presbyterians. Page 45 of the Proclaimer's book states, Russell wrote, "We felt greatly grieved at the error of Second Adventists, who were expecting Christ in the flesh and teaching that the world and all in it except Second Adventists would be burned up." Under Russell, Watchtower taught that irrespective of religion, people would gain salvation and survive Armageddon. His understanding was of a future probation where the masses of humanity would survive Armageddon, and then in Jesus' new kingdom, in perfection, they would be taught about God, and they would then choose in perfection whether or not they wanted to serve him. The resurrection was for all, and that included Adam and Eve and people such as Sodom and Gomorrah. Yet the religion he founded now claims that not just 99 out of 100 will die at Armageddon, but rather more like 99.9 will die out of 100, since there's only about one Jehovah's Witness in this world out of every 1,000 people. So what Russell was trying to prevent, this absolutely horrific idea that God would destroy almost everyone, and 99% of people, has become even worse because his own religion that he started now teaches that even far more than that will be destroyed at the coming Armageddon. It was during the period of Rutherford that these ideas of irrevocable ruin and judgment periods were introduced to the religion. These were concepts that Russell had tried to avoid. In the Watchtower of 1923, page 310 and 11, it showed that the clergy would not be saved. In 1930, Rutherford introduced the people that did not agree with him, such as apostates, would be destroyed at Armageddon. And then in 1939, he claimed that all these prior judgment periods, such as Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's flood, that the people in those periods would not even get a resurrection either, to coincide with his new teaching that everyone at Armageddon would also be in line for everlasting destruction. Unfortunately, later leaders have not attempted to soften Rutherford's strict stance, and witnesses are still expected to rejoice at the fact that they will survive when the majority of people will soon be destroyed. The Watchtower 1977, June 1, page 345 says, "In the near future, this generation will see the foretold great tribulation that will bring an end to this present wicked system. At that time, none of Jehovah's faithful servants, the only ones surviving, will mourn over the destruction of the wicked. To the contrary, they will rejoice, even as Moses and his people rejoiced at the destruction of Pharaoh and his army. If laid side by side, the corpses of the people that witnesses think are going to die at Armageddon would reach to the moon and back 7 times. And that number each year is growing. In 1986, anyone disagreeing that God will destroy all but Jehovah's Witnesses was classed as an opposer. Watchtower 1986 says, "Some opposers are entertaining ideas that God is so merciful that he surely will not cause the death of so many millions of people during the Great Tribulation." Watchtower feels it necessary to clarify that millions of people are not going to flock to the organisation shortly before the Great Tribulation. Watchtower 1997 says, "The Watchtower of August 15, 1996 said, in the final part of the tribulation, flesh that has fled to Jehovah's side will be saved." Is that suggesting that after the first phase of the Great Tribulation, many new ones will come over to God's side? That was not the point being made. Then in 1981, any person who wants to survive into God's righteous new order urgently needs to come into a right relationship with Jehovah and his earthly organisation now. Why is there such an urgency about coming to Jehovah's true worship now? Could not a sincere person wait until he actually sees Jehovah's executional judgments beginning and then come over to his side? While that might sound appealing to some, would there be enough time to build the right relationship with Jehovah? The evidence from the scriptures answers no. As part of their indoctrination, children are fed with graphic depictions of the slaughter they are led to believe God will shortly bestow upon fellow humans. This includes illustrations within books specifically developed for Jehovah's Witness children. The following image of people running from Jesus' arrows, their faces distorted by absolute horror and fear, is from page 243 of the 2003 children's book, Learn from the Great Teacher. Notice, however, how Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to respond to somebody who's asking, will only Jehovah's Witnesses survive Armageddon? In the following article, you can see how Jehovah's Witnesses are said to say, no, that's not what we believe. And then when they go on to explain the teaching, that is exactly what the Watchtower teaches. Jehovah's Witnesses, who are they? What do they believe? From 2002, page 29 shows how to answer the question, do they believe that they are the only ones who will be saved? No. Millions that have lived in centuries past and who were not Jehovah's Witnesses will come back in a resurrection and have an opportunity for life. Many now living may yet take a stand for truth and righteousness before the Great Tribulation, and they will gain salvation. Likewise, the Watchtower in 1970 said the same thing. Do Jehovah's Witnesses believe that only they will be saved? Jehovah's Witnesses believe that many will be saved who are not now Jehovah's Witnesses. But with regard to the coming Great Tribulation and being saved through that conflict, the Bible shows that people must now turn to God and take their stand on his side if they wish protection from him. Noah and his family were saved through the flood because they served Jehovah God. All the others were destroyed. Jesus said that this is what will happen at the coming Great Tribulation, and this Jehovah's Witnesses believe. It needs to be noted that not all Jehovah's Witnesses have internalized the official doctrine. To salve their consciences, because they can't accept how evil this doctrine is, such as my father and my brother-in-law, they come up with concepts as to how God is going to save more people than the Watchtower actually teaches. And that's why I think it's important to go through these quotes and to really understand what the Watchtower does preach, because it just shows what an unreasonable religion this one is. Quotes and Watchtower reasoning. Association with Jehovah's organisation. The first line of reasoning is that you need to be associating with Jehovah's organisation. So we need to identify what is meant by Jehovah's organisation. In Jehovah's organisation, it is not necessary to spend a lot of time and energy in research, for there are brothers in the organisation who are assigned to that very thing, to help you who do not have so much time for this. these preparing the good material in the Watchtower and other publications of the Society. So worshipping Jehovah in association with the Watchtower Society is presented as essential for salvation. Watchtower 2016. An even greater mistake would be to allow the faults of others to stumble us and cause us to leave Jehovah's organisation. Were that to happen, we would lose not only the privilege of doing God's will, but also the hope of life in God's new world. Watchtower 2011. If we stop actively supporting Jehovah's work, then we start following Satan. There is no middle ground. Watchtower 2013. At that time, the life-saving direction that we receive from Jehovah's organisation may not appear practical from a human standpoint. All of us must be ready to obey any instructions we may receive, whether these appear sound from a strategic or human standpoint or not. Watchtower 2007. But Jehovah's servants already belong to the only organisation that will survive the end of this wicked system of things. Watchtower 1993. But if we were to draw away from Jehovah's organisation, there would be no place else to go for salvation and true joy. Kingdom Ministry 1993. The primary purpose of a Bible study is to teach the truth of God's Word. It should also build in the student an appreciation for Jehovah's organisation and make him aware of the vital need to become part of it. The weekly Bible study should include instruction that will help students appreciate the organisation and take advantage of provisions for their salvation. Kingdom Ministry 1990. They must appreciate that identifying themselves with Jehovah's organisation is essential to their salvation. Watchtower 1981. Jehovah God has also provided his visible organisation. Unless we are in touch with this channel of communication that God is using, we will not progress along the road to life, no matter how much Bible reading we do. To be considered as a Jehovah's Witness and part of the organisation requires being an active publisher and reporting every month how many hours you preach door to door and in different forms of the ministry. Now, if we look at the following quotes, it shows how the number counted as a Jehovah's Witness is the number that the Watchtower reports as being active publishers each month. Those serving with Jehovah's organisation numbers grew until, in 1938, as many as 50,769 reported kingdom service. The following figure of 7 million is based on the 2007 publisher number. Those who will form the nucleus of the new earth are already nearly 7 million strong, in at least 235 lands and in some 100,000 congregations. A person is not counted as part of the organisation if they simply attend meetings or attend the memorial. If you look at how the Watchtower describes the excess number that attend the memorial who aren't preachers, it shows that these are considered fertile ground for joining and becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. They are not actually considered part of the organisation. Attendance at the memorial of Jesus Christ's death last year indicates that some 10 million people who are not witnesses of Jehovah were sufficiently interested in the good news to attend this important commemoration. I am aware many people that leave Jehovah's Witnesses can suffer lifelong fears of Armageddon, and am concerned these quotes may trigger fear and anxiety. For those that have not properly researched the religion, these fears may even cause potential concerns about having to go back for salvation. I urge you to research and seek help in such cases. Some points to keep in mind is that the word organisation never appears in the Bible. The word or term governing body never appears in the Bible. The faithful slave is simply a parable about congregation elders, not something to refer to a group of self-appointed leaders that must not be questioned. And if you look at Bible history, for the majority of this time, there was no organisation being used by God. These quotes that the Watchtower provides, although they may sound compelling, absolutely have no biblical basis. Children. Hi Zach.
Hey Dad.
So I'm doing a video regarding what Jehovah's Witnesses teach about salvation. And there's a part about children, and I thought it might be nice to have you read this part. So what do you think Jehovah's Witnesses teach about children, and what will happen to children when Armageddon comes if they're not Jehovah's Witnesses?
I guess they might die with their parents, I guess?
Okay, does that sound fair?
No.
No, it doesn't. Okay. But you're correct. That actually says that children will die at Armageddon if their parents are not Jehovah's Witnesses. So children are considered to share in the sins of their parents. And even babies will die at Armageddon. Can you believe that Jehovah's Witnesses teach that?
Yes, but it's not really a fair teaching.
Okay, let's read some of the quotes from the Watchtower that discuss this. So the first one there, it's Reasoning from the Scriptures. It's a book that Jehovah's Witnesses still use on pages 47 to 48. What does it say there, Zach?
What will happen to young children at Armageddon? In time past, when God destroys the wicked, he likewise destroys their little ones.
Okay, so basically they're saying that because, for instance, I should die at Armageddon because I don't believe the Watchtower, you will have to die at Armageddon as well, even though you really have no choice in the matter. Not very fair. Now let's read the Watchtower 1950, November 15.
If in these last days parents refuse to heed the divine instructions and warning, they bring destruction upon themselves and their small children at Armageddon.
And finally there's the 1968 Watchtower. What does that one say?
At Armageddon, parents will be held accountable for their children, and children will suffer for the failure of their parents.
So it seems very harsh that a God would punish children because of the failure of their parents, but yet that is the teaching. So all those babies that die at Armageddon lose any chance of having any hope of enjoying life. Thank you for your help, Zach. Association with the 144,000. Salvation comes from associating with the 144,000. And this is conveyed with different terminology. It could be the 144,000 or the remnant of the 144,000, the slave class, the governing body, more so these days, the most important part of the 144,000, the anointed. But regularly the Watchtower talks about how the great crowd have to be in association with this group if they want to be in line for salvation. These people that are considered of the anointed are the ones that take the emblems at the memorial. Watchtower 2015. He describes the sheep as righteous because they recognize that Christ has a group of anointed brothers still on earth, and the sheep loyally support the anointed during these critical last days. Watchtower 2013. That faithful slave is the channel through which Jesus is feeding his true followers in this time of the end. It is vital that we recognize that faithful slave. Our spiritual health and our relationship with God depend on this channel. Watchtower 2011. We need to obey the faithful and discreet slave to have Jehovah's approval. Worship the only true God. There would be a great crowd out of all nations who would not experience death, but would have the prospect of living forever on earth. The great crowd support the small number of those with heavenly hopes. Preaching. Previous quotes show that preaching is required to be considered a Jehovah's Witness. Watchtower has stated even more directly that preaching is a requirement for salvation. The Kingdom Ministry 2012 says, 12 reasons for preaching. 1. It helps save lives. 7. It is a requirement for our own salvation. From Paradise Lost to Paradise Regained says, only the preachers of God's kingdom can expect to be protected during the end of this world and to live through Armageddon into the new world. those in Babylon will be destroyed. Anyone part of any other religion, including those in Christendom, so all Christians apart from Jehovah's Witnesses, are said to be part of Babylon the Great. And so when Babylon the Great is said to be destroyed, anyone in any other religious group is said to be in line to share in her plagues. Watchtower 2005. How do we get out of Babylon the Great? This involves more than just severing any ties with false religion. Babylonish influence is present in many popular celebrations and customs, in the world's permissive attitude towards sex, the promoting of entertainment involving spiritism, and much more. Watchtower 1975. Let us recognize that Christendom is doomed, along with all the rest of Babylon the Great. She has refused to repent of her religiously immoral or adulterous course of action, her friendship with this world. She is like the rest of the ungodly world, even after Jehovah's Christian witnesses have plainly declared God's impending judgment to her. Watchtower 1984. Without question, the execution of divine judgment upon apostate Christendom and the rest of Satan's world is imminent. Noah's Ark represents baptism into the Watchtower organization. Watchtower teaches that 4,000 years ago there was a global flood that covered the tops of every single mountain on earth. And during that time, all humankind and virtually all animal kind died, except for the 8 people on the ark and the animals that went with them. Now this is said to represent baptism as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, baptism into Jehovah's organization, the Watchtower Society. So they say that just as you needed to be on the ark to survive the flood, you likewise need to be baptized as a Jehovah's Witness to survive Armageddon. Watchtower 2018. Just as Noah was preserved through the flood, loyal baptized ones will be preserved when the present wicked world meets its end. This makes dedication and baptism very important. A person who needlessly delays getting baptized endangers his prospects for everlasting life. You can live forever in paradise on earth. There was just one ark that survived the flood, not a number of boats, and there will be only one organization, God's visible organization, that will survive the fast approaching Great Tribulation. You must be part of Jehovah's organization, doing God's will in order to receive his blessing of everlasting life. From Kurukshetra to Armageddon and your survival, the circumstances relating to the end of our world order at Armageddon will be similar to those associated with the ancient deluge. Hence, the majority of mankind will be destroyed at Armageddon, and only a small minority of mankind will find favor with God and survive the war of the great day of God the Almighty. You may survive Armageddon into God's new world. Why should not blood run deep and far with over 2 billion dead? With the members of this generation that will not pass away before Armageddon breaks out, numbering now 2,500,000,000, and with only the remnant and a larger group of other sheep inside the greater Noah's Ark surviving, the death toll of the war of the great day of God the Almighty will be appallingly all-surpassing. Too many for the Armageddon survivors to bury. Come on, birds and beasts, have your fill then from the human corpses in retribution. If only 8 people survived the flood, could it indicate that God really may mercilessly kill billions with only a few survivors? Watchtower interpretation of a global flood never happened. There are endless lines of irrefutable proof that a global flood did not happen 4,000 years ago and could not happen. Other Christian religions sensibly accept that either this was referring to a local flood or it was included in Genesis as a figurative moral lesson. If you have any doubts about Noah's flood being a literal occurrence, please research such as a J.W. Fax article about the global flood. Word Jehovah required. Worshipping specifically Jehovah God is a requirement for salvation. Watchtower 2015. Really, our survival involves being devoted to Jehovah God and learning about the kind of conduct and deeds that please Him. Jehovah's Witnesses can show you from the Bible how you can be a survivor of this upcoming day. Watchtower 1998. The prophecy goes on to say, "It must occur that everyone who calls on the name of Jehovah will get away safe." Jehovah's Witnesses are truly grateful to know Jehovah's name, and they have complete trust that He will save them when they call on Him. This is a very effective strategy for making Jehovah's Witnesses feel that they alone are worthy to be saved, because they alone, they think, worship Jehovah. Now, if you understand why other Christian groups don't worship Jehovah, then it shows that this is actually a very fallacious argument. So firstly, Jehovah is a very inaccurate way of pronouncing the Tetragrammaton. Yahweh is far closer to how it should be pronounced. Secondly, the word Jehovah, or the Tetragrammaton, never appeared in the New Testament of the Bible. Although it appears in the Old Testament, in the New Testament there has not been found a single fragment with the Tetragrammaton. So in Christian times and in the Bible, the early Christians and Jesus were not saying the word Jehovah. And so most Christian groups imitate the example of Jesus and no longer use that particular term for God. And so if you realize that very, very dishonestly, the governing body or the Watchtower organization has added the word Jehovah to the New Testament to make it seem that this is a requirement of salvation, you get to understand just the level of manipulation this religion is going to make their followers feel specially unique and hence worthy of being saved on their own. Armageddon. Armageddon is described as a war between Jehovah and his followers and the rest of the world. In this war, billions of humans are going to die, and Jehovah's Witnesses alone will walk through the end of that war to live on this planet Earth forever. The Watchtower 2012 February article, The Truth About Armageddon, says on page 7 that the War of Armageddon results in the saving of millions of lives. Page 6 disingenuously says, the attack will result in the death of millions of people when God defeats the invaders. If millions will be saved, it would be honest to confess their teaching that billions, not millions, will die. Whilst modern articles present the doctrine in the more positive light of the millions that survive, older issues were quite open in presenting the resultant conclusion that there will be billions that die. Watchtower 1965. Yes, today, with Armageddon staring us in the face, we must keep in mind the sobering thought that millions, even billions of lives may shortly come to a swift and decisive end. Watchtower 1951. Those slain by him at the Battle of Armageddon will not be retained in his memory for a resurrection. That this group will include the majority of humans now living on Earth. Considering that Jehovah's Witnesses are probably the religion best known for using the fear of Armageddon to motivate its members, it is ironic that the 2012 Watchtower opens by saying, although the word appears only once in the Bible, the term is repeated often by the news media and by religious leaders. The truth about Armageddon can free you from needless fear. This is the very addition that goes on to say that the only survivors of Armageddon will be the millions that belong to the Brotherhood of Jehovah's Witnesses. Should people be in fear of Armageddon? Well, consider this. The word Armageddon appears just once in the Bible, despite it being a key teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses. The only time it appears is in Revelation 16:16. And there it is talking about a literal place, Megiddo. So with some incredible imagination, Watchtower leaders have claimed that Armageddon is actually a worldwide figurative place where there is a war between the heavenly forces and earthly mankind. In that war, there will be billions of mankind die, leaving just a smattering of Jehovah's Witnesses to survive. Now, this teaching has come a long way from what the Watchtower used to originally teach about Armageddon, which was that it was a period of social upheaval that started in 1874. If you consider the great variance that the Watchtower religion has been able to describe this one particular scripture with, it shows that we really should give no credence to their current interpretation. Is this doctrine fair? There are 12 classical world religions and over 34,000 Christian sects. Religious leaders commonly say that salvation requires belonging to their major religious tenet. Extremist religions will go further and say that salvation requires belonging to their particular sect. Now, is that a fair conclusion? The religion that a person belongs to overwhelmingly is related to where that person is born. George Santayana says, "What religion a man shall have is a historical accident, quite as much as what language he shall speak." Now, I speak English because I was born in Australia, but by no means do I recognise that as a superior language to any other language. It is simply an accident of birth, exactly how I was a Jehovah's Witness simply because I was born in a Christian country and my parents were therefore able to be contacted and converted to Jehovah's Witness. Had I been born in almost half the rest of the world, there is no chance that my parents would have been Jehovah's Witnesses or I ever would have had the chance to become one. Is the teenage Jehovah's Witness growing up in America, watching television or Netflix and listening to immoral pop music any more worthy of salvation than the Baptist missionary who thinks that they are doing what God wants of them? Is the Jehovah's Witness any more righteous than the Buddhist monk that is sitting in a situation of isolation and abstinence, thinking that the oneness with God is what is required for salvation because that is what they were taught in the country that they were born? When a religion teaches that there is an absolute truth, well, it makes sense that maybe following that absolute truth is a requirement for salvation. Anyone not worshipping Jehovah must be worshipping Satan, and so is deserving of destruction. Well, if there was an absolute truth and that absolute truth was easy to find, if God actually drew people out of the nations into his organisation and that organisation consistently taught absolute truth, well, possibly that would be a logical conclusion. However, looking at the history of the Watchtower Society, that just absolutely isn't the case. There is not an even number of people being drawn to the organisation around the world. Again, it depends on where you're from. Furthermore, the absolute truth that the Watchtower apparently teaches has changed dramatically over the last century plus that it has been around. There is teachings that are a bit flip-flopped from one to the other and back again. There are teachings that were absolute requirements for salvation that have changed. And even now, on an almost yearly basis, fairly fundamental teachings, such as even who the faithful and discreet slave is, have changed, showing that the Watchtower doesn't teach absolute truth. It's absolutely illogical to think that if Jehovah chose Russell and was directing him in the teachings that he gave, that the Watchtower then would later have to reject them because Jehovah had given Russell the wrong teachings even though he was part of that organisation. In Bible times, God indicated who he was using through powerful signs. He spoke directly to Abraham and provided many powerful miracles through Moses. First century Christians witnessed Jesus raising the dead and his apostles raising the dead and healing the sick. What sort of miraculous signs have the Watchtower leaders been able to generate to show that they are Jehovah's chosen people? Absolutely none. Not a single miracle, not a single sign that in any way could identify them as Jehovah's chosen organisation. They haven't even been able to get their eschatology correct, falsely predicting that the world would end in 1914, then in 1925. They implied 1975, that it would come before the end of the 20th century, and then that the end would come within a generation. The problem with saying that salvation is dependent on belonging to this single small Watchtower organisation is the Watchtower is just simply not accessible to over half of the earth. The following map shows that over half the earth is not Christian. By and large, the chance of being a Jehovah's Witness depends on being born in a country that was converted to Christianity over the last 2,000-year period. Billions of people will never ever hear the word Jehovah. Living in the following countries: Bangladesh, Cambodia, China, India, Mali, Nepal, Niger, Pakistan, Thailand and Turkey are around 3 billion people, nearly half of the global population. Yet in 2006, the Watchtower Service report showed that there was a combination of, in all those countries, and out of 3 billion people, of less than 40,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. That is not even one Jehovah's Witness for 70,000 people. Now these countries represent a vast range of different religious groups. There's Muslims, atheists, Buddhists and Hindus. And there's a whole range of different ethnicities. There's Africans, Indians, Asians and Europeans, showing there is no particular genetic type or cultural group that is predestined to be goat-like. In Pakistan and Bangladesh, virtually every single person will be destroyed because the ratio of Jehovah's Witnesses to worldly people is less than 1 in 1 million. In 2006, there was not a single Jehovah's Witness in Afghanistan. Is it fair to say that people born in those countries are just unlucky and would just have to miss out on salvation? In the 2011 Publisher report, there was listed 30 other countries that are banned. Highlighted in red, this makes up 16% of the Earth's mass and 27% of the Earth's population, representing 1.9 billion people. Now, despite the size of this group, they saw a peak of only 24,000 publishers in all those countries combined, so less than one Jehovah's Witness for every 77,000 people. Amber Scorer was a missionary for Jehovah's Witnesses that was sent to China, and she said when preaching to the Chinese, she came to a realization of just how terrible her teachings were, or just how unjust that concept is. She says, "Sooner or later in our study sessions, my students and I would get to the section in the book with the chapter on Armageddon, with its 2-page centerfold illustration of fire falling from the sky and people dying, reeling into the gaping earth. As I began to explain these things in a new tongue, in a new place, I started to hear what I was saying for the first time. So, because you were born here and I was born into my world, God's going to kill you and your family and friends and associates, but not me. Because you were educated differently in a different culture and therefore have a different explanation for life, for spirituality, for goodness, for meaning, you will die and I will live. This is because I was taught week in, week out from the time I was 5 that this all made perfect sense and you were not." Then I'd open the book to the Armageddon centerfold. I started to feel embarrassed. People of other religions are just as devoted as Jehovah's Witnesses. Kumbh Mela is a Hindu pilgrimage to bathe in a sacred river, attended by 100 million people in 2013. Now, by far the majority of these devoted spiritual people have not heard of Jesus and never will hear of Jesus, let alone Jehovah's Witnesses. Even in Christian countries, it's illogical to think that having to be a Jehovah's Witness is a requirement for salvation, and that God will destroy people who understand the Bible in a way different to Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, a person reading the Bible without the aid of the Watchtower will never come to a conclusion or an understanding of the Bible anywhere near what the Watchtower teaches. In fact, even the Watchtower proudly announces that. It says in 1983, "Where did we learn Bible truth in the first place? Would we know the way of the truth if it had not been for guidance from the organisation? Really, can we get along without the direction of God's organisation? No, we cannot." So see, you cannot learn Bible truth, according to the Watchtower's interpretation, without the organisation, because the Bible just is not naturally explained as the Watchtower explains it. If you are a Watchtower follower, do you think it's fair that if you were following the wrong organisation, you deserve to be destroyed, when it was your parents' choice that you became a witness, or because in some emotional time of need you were contacted and converted? Absolutely not. As the Watchtower discourages actively examining other beliefs, is it fair that you would be destroyed because you haven't been able to find the correct one? The comic series South Park highlights this in its typical straightforward fashion.
You are dead, and this is hell. Hey, wait a minute, I shouldn't be here. I was a totally strict and devout Protestant. I thought we went to heaven. Yes, well, I'm afraid you were wrong.
I was a practicing Jehovah's Witness.
You picked the wrong religion as well.
Well, who was right? Who gets into heaven?
I'm afraid it was the Mormons. Yes, the Mormons were the correct answer.
Now, what point does it sound insane for religion to say that they alone are the true religion and only their followers will be saved? Does it sound crazy when Mrs. Marion Keach from the UFO cult says that only her followers will be saved, just all 11 of them? Well then, how about if you've got 1 million followers, or 5 or 6 or 7 million followers? Does it sound saying that God will only save that little group? How about with a religion like the Catholic Church with over 1 billion followers? Does it sound fair that only Catholics would be saved and God would destroy all the rest of the billions on earth? To believe that God would find only a single religion to be truth and only a single religious follower to be righteous and worthy of salvation is not fair, and it is not logical. Only a small percentage of people convert to another religion, and there is no single destination for converts. The choice they make is simply a matter of circumstance, stumbling across a religion at just that right moment and offers what they need. An ARS survey shows that 84% of people stay in the same religion as their birth. That's only 16% that will convert. Now, of the 16% that actually leave a religion, the biggest group that they go to is no religion at all. So it's only a very small percent that will go from a religion to another religion. Now, the survey states that some groups such as Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses appear to attract a large number of converts, in-switchers, but also nearly as large a number of apostates, out-switchers. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, in 2017 spent over 2 billion hours preaching and only increased the number of publishers by 100,000. And yet, of that 100,000, probably at least half of them would have been raised in the religion. It just shows how completely ineffective it is to try and convert other people. And so changing a person from the religion that they were brought up in is really not a very likely occurrence. Well, despite how illogical it would be to think that God would only protect a small group of people, Jehovah's Witnesses wait in absolute expectation and anticipation that the end is about to come and billions of people will die. Listen to a snippet of this talk from 2007 by Bethel speaker brother Ciro Alicino at the absolute glee at him graphically describing this massacre that is going to occur and that Jehovah's Witnesses so eagerly look forward to.
Try to picture this, friends. This gruesome picture. Dead bodies and body parts of the wicked will lie strewn on the surface of the ground, in streets, alleyways, fields, and buildings. Now notice that God in this verse tells us here that no one will mourn or bury these dead ones. Now what does this tell us? It shows us that we will not be traumatized by his mass annihilation of these individuals. No, his divine execution of the wicked will not haunt us for the rest of our lives. Rather, we will react to it today as we do when a vicious serial murderer is executed. How do you feel about him when he gets it? Why, we will feel an inner satisfaction. Our indignation has been appeased. Yes, a sense of triumph that at last Jehovah's justice has been served. AIDS has been stopped. The gays are gone. The homosexuals, the lesbians, the murderers, the drug lords, all gone. Now, you're going to feel sorry for these people? No. And those that don't mind them living around, you're going to feel sorry for individuals? No. Now, how will Jehovah dispose of all these bodies of those slain by him? Ezekiel 39 and Revelation 19, you can look this up when you get home. We haven't got the time. Tells us that he will beckon his wild beasts and birds to come and devour their fleshy parts. However, the vast number of cadavers will be much more than they can consume. Therefore, Jehovah will doubtless use some highly scientific means at his disposal, perhaps antimatter, to disintegrate their putrefying organisms. Now, especially in cities where we live, there's going to be a high concentration of dead ones. We're going to have to need them because those animals in the Bronx Zoo, they got out. They're still going to eat all the bodies in the Bronx. No, but Jehovah demonstrates his...
On September the 11th, 2001, people watched in horror as a few thousand people died at the hands of some religious fanatics. And yet these few thousand people pale into absolute insignificance compared to the massacre that Jehovah's Witnesses think that God is going to mete out on the world in general. If the senseless death of a few thousand people based on religious ideologies offends people, how much more so should everyone be offended by this absolutely horrific teaching that Jehovah's Witnesses adhere to? Paradoxically, Armageddon is going to lead to the death of billions of people who have never heard Jehovah's name, and then result in the resurrection of billions of people who are just as evil who have never heard of Jehovah's name. So, what exactly is the difference between these two groups? Why is it that one group should be given the chance of everlasting life and the other group shouldn't? Well, I'll tell you exactly why, because the Watchtower is a genius marketing organisation. Rutherford started this concept that you have to join his organisation to be saved. Otherwise, what was the point? It is simply a sales pitch. It is marketing. It has no grounding in the Bible and has no grounding in love or logic. With a logical conceit, many people of many religions feel that their group alone should be saved, that they belong to the only true faith. Now, what is it about these members that they think that they are so much more special, so much more righteous than anyone else? Do they possess a greater level of intelligence? Do they have better heart conditions? Or are they just happy to concede that they were lucky? Really, the root of such reasoning lies at the heart of the gullibility of people and religious leaders taking advantage of that gullibility. Followers are content to accept whatever their religious leaders tell them. So if the religious leader says that God is willing to save everybody, then they will believe that. And then if the religious leader says that God is going to destroy everyone, they will believe that too. Jehovah's Witnesses are a classic example because Rutherford was able to completely change the teaching of Russell. Rutherford said that only Jehovah's Witnesses will be saved despite Russell starting the religion because he didn't believe that only a single group should be saved. And yet the followers of Watchtower at that time just blindly went along with Rutherford's teachings and have been continuing to go on blindly accepting this terrible doctrine ever since because their greatest concern is for their own salvation.